Hello, everyone, and welcome to a quick video here for Module 7 on pivot tables. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And we're going to use the same updated Zoo Pledges demo spreadsheet that I used last week in our previous video to show the idea of pivot tables. Again, in the previous video, we did things with sorting and filtering. We talked about using the features of a capital T table to summarize data. And Module 7 uses pivot tables, which is a different tool, another tool in Excel. Excel has a number of tools that oftentimes have various pathways to the same answer, and some tools are more intuitive to some people than others. In the case of pivot tables, I'm guessing it's foreign to almost all or all of you. But once you see pivot tables, it has some incredible efficiencies. We have a small data set here, but if I had a really big data set, the work wouldn't be any harder for me because it's the same kind of mouse clicks, the same kind of mouse moves that works whether I have 100 data points or 100,000 data points. And so that isn't always true when I'm doing things like sorting, filtering, highlighting cells for a function, etc. And so in Module 7, the pivot tables are one part of the challenge. The other challenge, which I'll have a separate video for, has to do with using some functions that involve logic. And each logic function that they talk about, we know a couple from previous chapters, like the if function, the VLOOKUP function. You'll see some of those favorites again, but you learn a set of new functions. And so, there's a list of new functions as part of the tasks. But what makes it perhaps a bit more challenging is that it's not just learning each individual function, it's the fact that we start to talk about nesting them and putting more than one function inside of a function, perhaps inside of another function. And so when you start doing that, it's like Legos, and each Lego is pretty simplistic by itself. But when you start putting one on top of another on top of another, you can build some more sophisticated kinds of objects. And so in this case, we can teach Excel to do some fairly sophisticated thinking. We just need to stack those logic functions together in the right combination and in the right order. And so with pivot tables, we're interested in summarizing the data. And a common question we might have had last time would be to say, well, I want to know how much money have we received by fund name. And again, I could filter the data set by bird sanctuary, find out the answer for general support, find out the answer for Kids Zoo. I could do a filter for every fund name, but a pivot table gives me an option that's going to give me all the funds and all of the sums. And so I'm going to click anywhere in the data, doesn't matter where. Again, it's a capital T table because I have a table design ribbon. And I'm going to use this, and I can either go to insert and then choose pivot table. That's where I typically go myself. I believe on the table design, there is a option that said summarize with pivot table. Either could get you there. And when I click on that, it's going to ask, where is the data coming from? In this case, we have a table. I click on it. It highlights all of the data in the table. It's hard to see perhaps, but there's a dashed line circulating around the outside. This table is called donations, if you remember the named ranges last time. And I'm going to put the pivot table on a new sheet. And when I do that, this is the part that starts to feel foreign for students, because in Module 6, the data was right there. You filtered it, you wrote functions, you used the totals row, you could see it right there in your face. Whereas when we're working with pivot tables, the data is still there. It lives on its own sheet, but now the pivot table lives on a new sheet. And if I want to do something by fund name, I could take fund name, drag it down as rows, and it will show me over on the left-hand side what are all the unique values in that particular column in the data set. And it turns out there are 4 unique funds. And if I were to take amount received, again, we have amount pledged, amount received, amount owed. I said I want to know how much money have we received by fund. I'm going to take amount received, drop it into the value section, and it will, when I release, it's going to change that to a sum of amount received. So it's going to default to a sum, and I get not only the $12,200 total that we've received, but how that money breaks down by zoo fund. And so I can create, the same answers by doing 5 filters, one for each fund, and then a grand total without any filters, and look at the totals row. But here, with a couple of mouse clicks, I get the total amount or the sum of amount received by fund. And if I said, well, instead of by fund name, the nice thing about pivot tables again is you can't break them. You can just start over. And so I could say, well, let's take fund name out and let's take donor type. Drop it in, and Excel will automatically slice and dice. We got individuals and organizations, and the $12,200 total gets sliced by individuals versus organization. And the power of pivot tables is if I said, well, I want to know individual and organization, I also want to know funds, let's put both into the pivot table at the same time. So I could take fund name, put it back, but this time as a column. And when I do that, now the 12,200 gets split into a total of, 10 values in the white plus 5 in the blue. So 15 numbers populate this table. And it shows me how much money was received by the bird sanctuary from individuals, how much money was received by the Zoomobile from organizations. Again, it calculates all those combinations, which would have been separate filters, changing 2 filters, recording the value, changing the filter, recording the value, doing that again and again until I had all 15 numbers. And so, hopefully you could see that if I was after all of the values, this is way more efficient than that filter process. Now, you could do it with filters and brute force. It's just going to take you more time. But remember, Excel was built for efficiency. We save money by being more efficient, getting to answers quickly. And so in that way, the other thing to show about pivot tables is that you can change the calculation. So if this is the sum of the amount received, again, if I went to the field down here in the value section, click on that arrow, I can choose value field settings, and there I can choose what kind of math happens. So if I want to know how many donations, I could do a count. And it would then tell me out of the 39 donations, how many were made to each of the various combinations of funds and donor types. If I wanted to know the average, again, a couple mouse clicks, go to value field settings, choose the average, click OK. Again, it rounds, it doesn't round things, so I get a lot of decimal places, which I can control. And so in that way, I can change the math down there in the value section, and then I can change which fields I slice and dice the data on in the rows and columns. And so I'm going to go to sum, switch it back to sum. And so in that way, I can do this with both things that are categorical, like fund name or amount received. If I wanted to create another pivot table, the nice thing about pivot tables is they're free. I oftentimes say that. So you can create 2, 3, 4, 5, and you do work through the homework, they'll have you create multiple pivot tables of different kinds. And so if I go to insert pivot table, again, use the same exact data source, put it on a new tab. This time I could take, say, pledge date, put it as a row. And again, pledge date is, the month, date, year. And I could take amount pledged, put it in the value section, and it'll take all of the pledges and group them by year. And if I want to see detail, I could say, well, in 2024 and in 2023, we had quarterly data. And so again, I might want to know quarterly data on pledges. If I go below quarters, I can get the monthly level of detail. And so I have the ability, and it's taking the raw data. This is the data that we were working with here in this table. and it's figuring out, and it knows how to put them together by year, by quarter, by month, by week, by day. And so again, if I want to drill down in this data and look at the big picture, what was our annual sales, all the way down to, in our case, day is the finest level we could. But if I had date timestamps, I could look at things by hour of the day. I could do some things without this wouldn't be automated, but I could look at, how much did we sell on first shift versus second shift versus third shift. I could create some groupings of times that it would then do summarizations on. So again, it has lots of capabilities. We sort of only scratched the surface of pivot tables in chapter 7, in part because it's new, and it takes a little bit to get used to. They do have other power, so I'm going to do one more pivot table here quickly. Besides summarizing the data as a pivot table, so if I take fund name and I take fund name, put it as a row. Why isn't it liking me today? There we go. And I take amount pledged, put it as a value. Again, I get the numbers of dollars pledged by fund. And when I create a pivot table, I get a new set of ribbons: pivot table analyze and pivot table design. Again, these have lots of bells and whistles that we can use. If I want to make a chart of this, I just made this pivot table. I can click on the pivot chart icon and it will make a bar chart. That's the default. But if I wanted a pie chart, I could choose that, click OK. And again, with 2 clicks of the mouse, I get the start of a pie chart that shows the amount pledged by fund name in this data set. And again, I could have created these things. I could do the filters. I could collect the data. I could type it into Excel. I could say insert pie chart. Again, it's got these efficiencies. I can go from a pivot table to a pivot chart. And if I change something in this setup, the power of pivot tables is that it's dynamic. Note when I click away from the pivot chart and the pivot table, that field list goes away on the right. When I click on it, the pivot table, now this comes back. So sometimes people get lost when they lose that field list. If I took amount pledged off and said, well, let's look at amounts received, I can drag it one out, drag one in, and the numbers will update, the totals update, the percentages on the pie chart update. Again, it is totally dynamic to the data that we are accessing. And so if I change the pivot table, the charts update and so forth. And if I want to take and say switch fund name out and drag in donor type. Again, donor type is individual and organization. The pie chart changes and it shows me the percentage of the same $12,200, but by individuals and organizations. And everything about this pie chart or the chart itself and the table is editable in the sense of formatting, colors, styles, etc. There's all kinds of details, just like we learned in chapter 2. You can do all kinds of formatting and graphic design things in cells. You can do the same kinds of things in a pivot table and a pivot chart. And so everything we learned in chapter 4 about how to work with a pie chart and change colors and change data labels and etc. is exactly the same. And so, this builds on it. It's just that rather than having to go through the process of getting the data to put into Excel to make the pie chart, we're able to make a pivot chart and then with 2 clicks get at least the start of a pie chart. Again, it's not the perfect finished product. I have to edit the title. I probably need labels. I might want to move around things, change colors, but it is, again, a quick way if I just want to take a peek at the data, or if I'm just wanting to get a head start on the creation of these objects, and then I can edit them in the way that I want, either per the instructions or by what my customer or my boss might want in terms of the design of these things for a presentation. And so with that, that is a short overview of pivot tables. Again, there are lots of other bells and whistles that go with this. We'll see a few of those in chapter 7. We may see a little bit more in a later chapter. There's a chapter we won't cover that also covers more on pivot table design. Again, it's a powerful tool. Knowing it exists puts you ahead of a lot of people in the workplace. Again, because of its efficiency, those that don't know it are putting in a lot of work doing things the hard way. And, learning how to do things with pivot tables makes you that much faster, that much more efficient. And, the goal is not to spend our time brute forcing things in Excel. It's to get the information to help make a decision. And so the more that I can let Excel do the work, the more time it leaves to think strategically, to think managerially about the decisions you have to make. And so if you have questions on pivot tables, feel free to reach out. There are a lot of resources in SAM. There are a lot of resources on the web. Again, these videos oftentimes give you a quicker uh, up to speed than some things you'll find out on other places on the web. So have a great week, and we will talk to you soon.